You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 108. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so glad that you joined me here this week. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well, and I'm excited to get into conversation with you about how to find work that you love. Today's episode is dedicated to a very special friend of mine. We went out for lunch yesterday, and she and I got into a big discussion, a fairly deep discussion about professional work and career transitions. And she asked me during the course of that conversation how I went about finding work that I love, work that I feel passionate about. And she asked me this question more than once, which had the effect of planting that question in my mind. And so, yes, I answered it in the time and in the discourse we were having over our lunch. But since we parted ways, I've been reflecting on that question, and I thought this is a really great topic to bring to today's podcast episode, because I think there's a lot of you out there who are asking yourself the same question. I know it comes up often in my coaching conversations with the clients that I work with. They come to me, they have hit a point in their career where they feel a bit stuck. They feel like they've hit a plateau. They've lost that sense of engagement with their work. And what they're looking for is something that ignites their interest, their passion, where they feel engaged. And so I'm really excited to be spending this time talking with you about how you can find work that you love. Now, before we dive in, I did want to mention that I am hosting a free webinar on Thursday, June 15th at noon Pacific time. The information to register is attached in the show notes to this episode. And that webinar is designed to help you hit the pause button before we roll into summer so that you can look at what you want to accomplish over the next 6 months, how you want to spend the balance of 2023. And one of the objectives there is to use your summer months to set yourself up for success and to proactively plan for the rest of the year so that the transition from summer to September is a little bit smoother. I don't know about you, but what I find often happens is that summers are busy, but busy in kind of a different way. My kids are out of school, and so it's dial up the intensity of the juggle between professional work and family life. And then September hits, and all of those things are, it's almost like someone is listening to the stereo and they turn the volume up twice as high, or you accidentally hit the unmute button on your remote control and you didn't realize that the volume was set at like 100 and all of a sudden it's really, really loud. That's what September can feel like. And so the objective here is to plan proactively so that you're on track, you're aligned, you know what you want to do, and so that you can navigate that September hurdle a little bit more smoothly, and so that your year can feel more balanced, more steady, more peaceful. I don't know about you, but another thing that sometimes happens to me is that cycle where you kind of get into that end of year cycle where things are really ramping up, it gets really intense, and you're kind of full throttle all the way into December. And by the time January rolls around, you just need a nap. And so again, the idea here is just to plan a bit more proactively so that you feel really good. On December 31st, 2023, you feel really good about the goals that you have achieved for yourself. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I am running another group program. So I'm wrapping up my first ever 6-month group coaching program with a group of incredible women lawyers. There are 8 of them altogether. I love and adore them, and I have just enjoyed the work that we've done together so much, and I'm going to be running another program beginning in July. So if that's something that is of interest to you, then please do let me know. I'll have the information linked in the notes again to this episode. But if you can't find that information, then just send me a note and I will send that to you. That is going to be a wonderful experience. Again, it creates a container for the work that we're setting up for the balance of the year, which is ultimately to have clear goals and to have ways of achieving those goals that aligns with you, that feels good, that isn't super, where you're feeling strategic about the steps that you're taking. So those are a couple of announcements I wanted to make before diving into the topic of finding work that you love. Now, as I mentioned, this is a question that comes up quite frequently in coaching conversations that I have with clients. And for lawyers, I think it's particularly challenging because of a number of reasons. Number one, lawyers follow a very lockstep, predictable path to becoming a lawyer in the first place. There's a very regimented program. You go through university, you write the LSAT, you go to a law school, you article if you're in Canada, and then you enter into some sort of a professional job, whether it's at a law firm or with government or in-house or an organization, and everything looks a fairly predictable way. And the nature of your work has you in rules. So you're constantly looking at rules and what is allowed and what is not allowed. And so that can lend itself to the way that you start thinking about your career. And it's almost like you are looking for a drop-down menu. What are the options that I can pick from that will offer up different paths that I might love, where I might find my passion? And what I'd offer here is that sometimes the work that you love isn't going to be available on one of those drop-down menus. Another reason that it can be really challenging for lawyers is that because of the nature of your work, you may find that you're quite risk averse. And what you really want is to find the right answer. And what I can say about finding the right answer is, number one, that puts a lot of pressure on your shoulders to get it right? To get the A, right? And when it comes to finding something you love, something that you're passionate about, that to me requires a certain amount of creativity, a certain amount of thinking outside the box, of introspection, of allowing things to be uncertain. And so if you're wanting to find the right answer, and you're also looking for that love, for that passion, it's almost like that quest for rightness squashes the creativity that you need to find the thing that you love, to find the passion that you're looking for. And you can think about when you're under stress and your body reacts to that stress, and it has the effect of shutting down what is not necessary. It's the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic response. So sympathetic is when you're in a stressful situation and it's that fight, flight, or freeze response. And you're really just focused on next steps. You're really just focused on survival. And so your ability to access your more creative thinking is actually circumscribed in those moments versus when you're in the parasympathetic, the more peaceful, the rest and digest state where you're more open and you have greater access to creativity. So if you're putting all the pressure on yourself to find the right answer, you're actually working against yourself when it comes to finding opportunities that create love and passion for your work. Another challenge that I see among lawyers is having a certain standard and being used to a certain standard. Sometimes people call it the golden handcuffs or something similar to that, where you are used to being compensated at a certain level. You're used to having the clarity of what your job description is. You have relationships that you have built up with your colleagues. And so it can be really difficult when things are generally good, but they're not great. It can feel really hard to leave something like that. Another challenge that I see lawyers having is not being in tune with their emotions. And so you may find, and I absolutely found this, you may find that you're so fixated on the data, on the facts, on what's logical, what makes sense on paper, that you can lose sight of your emotional life, what actually does light you up. And so again, if you're looking for passion, you're looking for love, and you're focused on using exclusively your mind to calculate what that formula is going to look like, there's a bit of a disconnect there. And so part of the process is getting back in touch with the things that you do love, getting to know how you feel about your work in order to find work that you love. Finally, I think an area or a challenge that I see among clients that I work with is that they haven't necessarily defined for themselves what they mean by work that they love or work that they feel passionate about. And I looked up dictionary definitions of both love and passion before starting this recording. And I can't say I was blown away by the definitions that I found for love. And admittedly, I did not spend a ton of time on this, but feelings of affection. That was kind of the running trend among the different definitions that I looked at. So feelings of affection, that's fine. I think when you're talking about a person, feelings of affection, but I'd invite you to define love a little bit more granularly. Like, what does love actually mean to you? Is it commitment? It's dedication. It's curiosity. It's wanting to be more in the presence of a person, a thing, a work, whatever it happens to be. So first of all, I'd invite you to think about what love actually means to you. And then the second one that I'd invite you to think about is that word passion. And the definition for passion, the one that I pulled for today, strong and barely controllable emotion. So I'll just read that again. Strong and barely controllable emotion. And so passion, I think, is one of those emotions that we want to be a little bit careful about when we talk about wanting to have work that we are passionate about. It might be setting the bar a little bit high if we want to have work that we feel, so strongly about that we can barely control our emotion. And in some ways that can be really beneficial if you have that really strong sense of passion. In other areas or in other ways, you may not want it to be all passion all of the time. I think ultimately a balance of both is probably good, or a balance of passion is probably good. But again, this isn't about what I think. This is about what you think. So when you think about having work that you feel passionate about, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that you feel passionate every single day? Does it mean that you feel passionate about every task that you do? What is it that you've set up in your mind's eye? What is the image that you have of work that you love and feel passionate about? Now, sometimes you might find that you fall into a role, work, a career, a job that is just a perfect job for you, where you feel good, you feel aligned. I mean, it's kind of like the equivalent of marrying your high school sweetheart. Like maybe you just know, right? You've met that person and you just know right out of the gates, and you never have to question whether or not you love your job. You just do. But for others, there's that feeling of, is this really the right job for me? Is this really the career for me? And when that happens, sometimes you may make a decision, a conscious choice that what you have is good enough. It may not be what lights your world on fire, but it's good enough and you're going to make the best of it. You might decide that you're going to stay there, but then you complain about it. Again, it's kind of that idea of the golden handcuffs, that you think there's something better or there's something that's better for you, but you feel so attached you don't want to leave it. And what you might find is that you make a move and you use the same strategies to make the move that you've been using the whole way through. And so you may change from job A to job B, but because you've used the same standards, you've used the same strategies, maybe it's that lockstep, what looks good, what seems to fit the boxes type of approach, you might find that you end up in another position where you have that same experience. So on paper, it looks good, but inside, you're just not feeling it. So what can end up with is that you have a feeling of it being good enough or pretty good, but you continue to have a little voice inside of your head that keeps asking you, right? Is this really what you want in your career? Is this really what you want in your life? What if there's something else out there for you? What if there's something better? And so the purpose of today's episode is to help you find what it is that you love, what it is that might be better for you. And as I mentioned at the outset, I've got 4 questions for you, and I'm going to take you through each of those questions. And you can pause the recording. You can write down the questions. I strongly encourage you to answer these questions for yourself. This is basically what I did to find what I love to do. And so this might be a process that helps you find what you love to do. So the first step in the process is to ask yourself, the first question is, what matters most to you? What we're really getting at here is, what are your values? And your values are what drive you. The values are what are core and central to you. I do values exercises with my clients often. If you want to have a really simple values exercise, go onto your computer, type values list or a list of values into Google, see what comes up. There's probably going to be a list of about 100 different values for you to choose from. Go through that list, see what resonates with you, and you can literally find the top 5 values, the top 10 values that guide you. Your values are really important because when you understand what matters to you, it gives you a framework for the decisions that you make going forward. Now, I did my first values exercise around the time that I decided that I was going to transition into coaching. I was seeing a career counselor at the time who offered me up a values exercise, much like the one that I just described to you. There was a list. There were 100 different values to choose from. I had to rank them all, and then I had to rank them after I ranked them. And ultimately, we ended up in the top 5 values. And I continue to do exercises with myself to reassess what my values are. And I even have my values written down on a sticky note that is posted in front of my computer so that I can see it. And the values shift over time, but usually number 1 is health, because I think I need my health in order to live a good, sane, productive, energized life. So that's huge for me. That's number 1. It's that whole put your own airplane oxygen mask on first when you're in the airplane. That's number 1. Number 2 is usually my family. So I've got my husband, my children. I look after my kiddos with my husband. They are obviously a priority to me. And so they're right up there in the list. Excellence is top of my list. I really love things that are done at a highly professional level. I think of professional work usually when I'm thinking about excellence, like what is professional, what is aligned. Connection is right up there in my values. I really value the connections that I have with people in my life. So the relationships that I have, I love connecting people with people. I love ideas, connecting ideas. So you can see how this, I could go on. I won't. I could go on with a whole list of values, but you can see how once you've identified what your values are for yourself, how you start to understand yourself better. And that's a framework, a guide for you, because when you start to find work, then you can see, does it align with my values? So if, for example, you have family near the top of your list, like I do, then that's going to inform maybe not so much what I do for my professional work, although I think it does in the sense that I like my family to be proud of me. And so I like to be really proud of the work that I do. And that informs the substance of what I do. But it definitely, in my case, informs how I do the work that I do. So by the how, I mean, is my working arrangement flexible enough to allow me to care for my family in the way that I want to, while at the same time executing my professional work in the way that I want to, with that level of excellence that I value so highly. And so it is a struggle. It is a challenge. And as my children have gotten older, it's become easier to navigate that balance. But when you think about your values, and you think about what you want to do and how you want to do it, I'd invite you to think of both of those criteria. It's not just being able to do work that you love. It's being able to do the work that you love sustainably in relation to all the other facets of your life. So question number 1, what matters most to you? Now, the second question that I would invite you to consider is, what are your natural strengths? Yes, what are your natural strengths? Now, this is a question that I ask every single coaching client that I work with. It's in an intake form that I offer to them. And I'm always fascinated by my clients who tell me, I had a really hard time completing that part of your intake form. I had a really hard time figuring out what my strengths were. And I think the reason for that is that we are conditioned not to talk about our strengths. We're conditioned to think that talking about what you're good at is somehow bragging, or it's arrogant or conceited, or it's just not okay to go around talking about how great you are. And in my coaching conversations with my clients, I absolutely encourage and welcome and want them to use that time, use that space as an opportunity to tell me how great they are. I want that. And I want that for you right now. I want you to think about how great you are. What do you do that is exceptional? And it may be really difficult for you to identify that in yourself because you don't see it. So think about what you're good at And I also invite you to look for the clues that will help you identify what it is that you're good at. So a couple of ideas here. One is to notice what other people have said to you that are your strengths. So for example, I have had people tell me that I'm a good listener. I've had people tell me that I ask really good questions. Other feedback that I have received that I'm good at looking out into the future and sort of envisioning what is going to happen. I've been told that, sorry, there's a dog barking outside of my window and it's really distracting. I don't know if you can hear it, but I can certainly hear it. Anyways, other things that, well, I guess I won't put that on my strengths list. Being distracted by barking dogs is not one of my strengths. But what are some of my other strengths that people have told me about? Creativity. I didn't ever really see myself as a creative person, but I've had other people tell me that I'm creative. And so you can see where this is going. And again, I'm not saying this to say I'm the best listener or the most creative or whatever. I'm just encouraging you to think about what other people may have said to you in the past that is a strength. And the reason that I picked those strengths in particular is because those are strengths that I think make coaching, the work that I do, coaching, speaking, the work, the consulting, all of that aligns with things that I have been told that I am good at. And so you want to think about what you are good at. And that ultimately, again, going back to what we're talking about, how we're going to weave that into the exercise of finding work that you love. Another way of finding out what you are really good at is to ask people. And I've done this in coaching programs that I've done. I've been instructed in my program to go out and ask people, what are some of my strengths? And in fact, we did that in my group coaching program. I had a list of questions that the members of the group were to go out and ask others in their community, whether it's a family member, a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a client even. I mean, this is your opportunity to ask somebody who you trust, who you know, who you like, who you have that relationship with, and you can ask them what they think that you are particularly good at. And that will be so great for you because now you'll have additional insights that you may not have had yourself because you don't see that. You don't see that. You don't see yourself from the outside looking in. Another way to assess what your strengths are is to take an online test or to do some of this more complicated diagnostic testing. Now, I am going to recommend a free online test. It's called the VIA Strengths Survey, and there will be a link to that in the notes to this show. So you can do that, and it will tell you your top strengths. There's 21 strengths that they measure, and they will give you those strengths in order. I have taken that test a few times, and what that test again taught me that I was really surprised by, creativity came up there. And I can tell you in the dozen or so years that I practiced as a lawyer, I don't think I ever heard, I don't think creativity was ever on my radar. I didn't think I was creative. Nobody ever told me I was creative. Well, maybe my mom. Thank you, Mom. But again, this was something that I never valued. I never saw it. And yet now in the professional work that I do, I lean heavily on my ability to create because I'm in a business. I have my sole practice where I am constantly trying to create new things. And so creating this podcast episode, for example, when I'm asked to do speaking engagements, I'm creating a curriculum. When I do coaching programs and when I'm creating questions for my clients. And so you can see how you may have strengths that you did not even realize were strengths. And so that's why this exercise is so valuable, because you do not yet know what you are going to learn about yourself. And when you have that information, there's so much that you can do with it. So that is the second question. The first question, of course, what matters most to you? The second question, what are your natural strengths? The third question is, what are you drawn to? Now, this is starting to get a little bit closer to that love and passion part of the work. And what you want to think about here is, what are you naturally gravitating toward? And you can ask yourself this in relation to your life generally and in relation to your professional work. And I'd invite you to do both, especially if you're really struggling to find something that you love. So when I was going through my transition, I asked myself these questions. And one thing that I really, really love, that I'm actually extremely passionate about, is food and health. I am really interested in cooking. Probably not as much the recipes I've been cooking for my family, but lately they've started to get quite dialed up, actually. I'm starting to refine the passion for cooking. It can get hard when you're doing it day in, day out, 3 meals a day, however many days a week. But I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested in wellness. And so when I was initially thinking about what kind of coaching I wanted to do, wellness coaching was certainly on the table. Now, I am also very committed and passionate about working with lawyers. And so that is the work that I have chosen. And I love the work that I do in relation to professional development and finding what you love and building a career where you're able to build toward and work toward realizing your potential. That to me is probably the driving force. The core of my work is that I'm obsessed with the idea of potential and the idea that we can continue to work toward that throughout our lives, that work is the truest source of joy. So that is my sweet spot. I can feel it now, even talking about it. And so I mention food, I mentioned wellness, because that is another area that I feel passionate about. And I do incorporate some of that into my coaching, not a ton. But that is, if I were to look at what lights me up, that is certainly one of them. What is probably more relevant in terms of work is coaching, right? This is a question that my friend asked me yesterday. She said, how did you find coaching? Like, how did you find it? And the answer to that literally is that I signed up for an online program. It was a fitness program. So it was related to another one of my passions, right? That wellness component. And it was a program that had like kind of an interactive web-based interface where you would type in your information for the day, you type in what you ate, the exercise that you had, you type in how you were feeling, and magically this person from outer space, it felt like, would respond and say things like, good job, you got your 10,000 steps, or they would comment if I told them that I was having a bad day. And just the fact that I had this interaction, this support. I never met this person. I mean, this person was probably working at a call center somewhere on the planet. It might have been a robot for all I know. I mean, this was way before ChatGPT, but for all I know, this person wasn't even human. And yet, having that encouragement along the way, what it did for me was it created a desire in me to continue to push myself and to beat my own records and to try new things and to get really creative about what I was doing. And I thought to myself, wow, this is so fun. I'm really loving this from a fitness level. What could this do? Imagine if you had this for professional work. And so I literally went to my computer and I typed in lawyer coach. I typed that into Google and I found that lawyer coach was a thing. I mean, if we want to go back to the checkboxes, I kind of found my drop down menu. Okay, here's a category of work that is actually in existence. And God bless the lawyer coaches that went before me, in particular, Allison Wolf, who is the first lawyer coach that came to me in my search. I have now had the opportunity to work with Allison. She's been on the podcast. She's amazing. And so I was able to see that, yes, in fact, this is possible. And from there, I just continued in my search and I continued to get more interested in coaching. I pursued more research in terms of what coaching was. I pursued more research in terms of who was doing it. I looked into coach training programs. And as I continued that, what I noticed is that I was continually more and more impassioned and inspired and intrigued by this work. And so that meant I was listening to TED Talks. I was listening to podcasts. I was buying all these books about professional development. I was imagining what my practice could look like. And I remember having a friend over right before I started my coaching program. So I did a certification through Royal Roads University. It's on Vancouver Island. And a friend of mine who's also, or at the time, she is a lawyer. I was also a lawyer at the time. And she was over for dinner and I showed her this collection of books that I had about all these different topics. And, you know, I can kind of remember the look on her face. It was a little bit like, I don't know, kind of like almost puzzled. And I don't really know what she was thinking, but when I saw that look on her face, I kind of realized like, wow, Paula, you've kind of gone over the deep end here. Like you're really into this. And she might think it's kind of weird that you have all these books. And this was back in 2017. So I can tell you that book collection has not gotten any smaller. And if anything, it's kind of taking over our house right now. Just ask my husband. But you can see how it's this insatiable thirst. And as I got deeper into the coaching realm, as I did my first week of in-person training. So the program I did had a week of in-person training. I just knew from the moment that the instructors opened their mouths and started talking about all the different concepts, and we learned about active listening, and we learned about how the brain works and how you want to ask questions. And it was just this incredible opportunity. And I knew it was like a full body yes, like this is exactly where I'm meant to be. So that's how I found coaching, which continues to be the love of my life from a professional perspective. And I share that with you because you want to figure out for yourself. Again, the question that I'm posing you is, what are you drawn to? So what are you drawn to when you look at your life? What are the things that you feel really passionately about, that you get excited about, where you're out and you're buying all the books and people are asking you, why do you have so many books about, I don't know, gardening, in my case, professional development? Maybe it's law for you. I know lawyers who bring copies of Supreme Court of Canada cases with them on the airplane because they just can't wait to read even more cases. Like that is what they want to do in their spare time. I wish I could say I was that kind of lawyer. I'm not. I am that kind of coach. So look at what you love. And when you look at your work, ask yourself what it is in your professional work that you love doing. So if I go back to my work as a lawyer, here are some of the things that I really loved about my job. I loved the truth. I loved figuring out what is the truth, the understanding what the story is, understanding what is going on behind the scenes, those confidential stories that nobody gets to hear except for you because you are the lawyer. And that leads to another thing that I love, which is being in a position of trust. I love when people feel like they can trust me, and I take that trust, that confidence seriously. I like to think I'm like a vault. And if you tell me something and you don't want anybody to know that you've told me that thing, it stays with me. And that's part of what I loved as my work in my work as a lawyer, and part of what I continue to love in my work as a coach. Again, I loved the level of professional excellence that comes along with being a lawyer. What I loved about being a litigator was having multiple files on the go. So it's like there's all these little pots bubbling, and I found it was really engaging to be able to switch from one file to another file. It kept it exciting for me. Other things that I loved about lawyering, language. So reading, writing, that to me was really satisfying. It continues to be a part of my practice. I continue to love language and work with that. I continue to write. I continue to speak. I really love problem solving. So when people give you a problem to solve, whether it's a difficult, complicated research question, or somebody just needs you to file something or get something done in a hurry, I just love that. I love working with teams, all in relation to a common goal. I love working independently. So I have a high threshold for independent work. I really enjoy that time to myself. I also really love high intensity work cycles. So as a litigator, I would go to court and I would find that really exhilarating. But I also loved to couple that with quieter times at the office where I was drafting or researching. So I didn't want a practice that was full on all court all the time, but I wanted my work to be punctuated with levels of heightened activity because to me that felt exciting. I also really loved having high stakes. So things that actually matter. That to me is inspiring. That gets me motivated. So you can see how if you look at all the different parts of what I enjoyed as a lawyer, I've managed to take a lot of those attributes and I've turned them into my coaching practice. So I do have that position where I get to have those conversations with people where we are speaking the truth, where people come to me and we work with what they're grappling with and we come to resolution. We solve problems, all these things, the punctuated nature of my practice. I have multiple different projects on the go. I have my coaching practice. I do speaking. I do consulting. And so there's all these different projects that are going on at any given time. It gives me that variety. And that is how I built it. That's how I created it. And so I share this not to tell you that I've done it the right way and that you should do the same thing. Not at all. But it is an example of how you can look at what you've already done and think about how you could take the things that you love and convert those into work that you actually love. Before I move to the next topic, the next question, I wanted to refer to a conversation that I had with a client fairly early on in my coaching career where she was trying to decide whether or not to leave law. And it was so fascinating because we had about an hour and a half long session. And she started out by saying she didn't really know what she wanted to do. But by the end of it, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She had the answers already. And part of the exercise that we did together was she basically went through the breadcrumbs. I think that was a word. I think she came up with it. Maybe I came up with it, but let's say she came up with it. It's very good. The breadcrumbs. If she looked back at her history at work, she really enjoyed all aspects of her work that related to human resources. And ultimately, she decided that that was an area that she wanted to go into. So I'd invite you to look at the breadcrumbs. Look at what you've done over the course of your career that has resonated with you, the things that you've loved about your job. Make a list of those things because that's going to give you more information about what you are drawn to. So we've covered 3 questions. Number 1, what matters most to you? Number 2, what are your natural strengths? Number 3, what are you drawn to? And so now we're at number 4. And this is probably the toughest question for you to answer. Here it is. What container allows you to combine what you value, what you're good at, and what you love? I'll read that again. What container allows you to combine what you value, what you're good at, and what you love? And that container, of course, if we're looking at it from the context of professional work, needs to be work that you get paid for. So who's going to pay you to do this work? And you may have heard of the Japanese concept of ikigai, and it's spelled Ikigai for, just in case I pronounced it wrong, which I probably did, but ikigai. So it's made up of 4 different components, and it's found at the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. So it's a neat concept. I think it ties in nicely with what we're talking about today. We've spent some time already talking about what you love and what you're good at. You'll need to figure out what does the world need and what is there a market for? Where will you get paid for this work? And so how do you find it? How do you find a container that allows you to do those things? And one side note before we go too far into the container, I think sometimes lawyers that I work with, myself included, sometimes I think we can get hung up on the box that we fall into, right? Oh, am I going to be a private practice lawyer? Am I going to be an in-house lawyer? Am I going to be a government lawyer? Am I going to be something other than a lawyer? I think sometimes we look at the labels and we get really fixed on what the label is. And what I invite you to think about more is what is inside of that job? Like, what are the common skills or what's the substance of what you want to do? And to focus more on that than the label that you're going to put on it. That being said, we're looking for containers here. So when you go about looking for a container, I have some ideas on how you're going to do that, because this really is that how piece, right? Like, how do I get from knowing kind of what I love, what I would love to do, to finding that out there in the real world? So to answer this question, I thought about my own approach when it comes to finding things. And the reason I thought my approach would have value here is that I'm kind of the person in my family that people go to when they need to find something. This has been the case since I was very young. My mom nicknamed me Polly Finder when I was a kid, which I realize now was really clever. And the reason she named me Polly Finder, not all the time, just sometimes it was a nickname. The reason that she would call me that is because when things would go missing in our house, and we had 4 kids and it was a lot of crazy a lot of the time, things would go missing, like the soother or a pair of socks or the house keys or something important, the remote, whatever it was. And so they knew they could turn to me and ask me to go find the thing, and I would somehow put myself to task and I would just go find it. And so I tried to imagine or ask myself how it is that I do that. And interestingly, number 1, I think it was a very clever strategy on my mom's part, because if I look at myself now and how great it would be to have like some person that I could just say, hey, the keys are missing, can you go find it? And they would do that for me, that would be amazing. I happen to have taken on the same role in my current household. I don't know, I just seem to do it. I have this weird photographic memory for keys and socks and random toys and remote control. It's very strange, but it comes in really handy. And so I'm going on a tangent here. Yes, you're probably wanting to invite me over to your house now to find your missing keys. Side note, we are in the process of looking for some missing keys at our house. So I'll keep you posted if we find them or not. It's actually a multi-day. This is kind of like the jigsaw puzzle with 10,000 pieces. It is a very big challenge. So anyways, the point is, what do you do when you're trying to find something? And the thing that I do, so if I was figuring out what is my strategy, the number one thing that I do, the number one thing is to know what I'm looking for. So if somebody says, okay, Paula, I've lost my keys and I know what those keys look like, I'll usually ask for a description if I haven't seen them before. Well, what exactly does it look like? Then I can create that mental image in my mind's eye. And when I'm now looking, I can actually see it. So for you, this is going to be hard, of course, right? Because we don't know exactly what that job looks like, but we do know because you've made the list, you've done the work, we know what you value, we know what you're good at, your strengths, and we know what you love. We know what you are drawn to. So you have those ideas in your mind. So now you get to use those as a focal point, as an idea of what you're looking for. So that's number one, is to identify what you're looking for. Number two is to retrace your steps. This is probably the best strategy that I know of to find things. Now, this works really well if you're finding something that you have lost. So if you have had experiences in your past where you have been really happy in your life, in your professional work, you can go back to those times and you might ask yourself whether there's something there that you could build on going forward. So that step two is to go back into your past, retrace your steps, and try to find what it is that you are looking for based on where you've already been. And it may be, and this is an exercise that I do, if I don't find the keys or the item on that first pass, then I start to get really creative. Okay, well, let's say I was walking from the car to the house. What would I have done in the interim? Okay, I was in the house and I put the laundry in. Oh, maybe the key went into the laundry. Like, I'll retrace my steps and I'll imagine all the different possibilities along the way where the thing could have gotten lost. So here, you might also ask yourself, were there any junctures along the road where you made decisions? And maybe those decisions are ones that you can revisit. So for example, when I went to law school, I looked at law school and I also looked at getting a graduate certificate in international relations from a school in Geneva. Now, that was a crossroads for me. So I did go back there. I did think, okay, is that a road that I would like to take now? And in that case, no, it wasn't a path that I wanted to take. But for you, there might be a fork in the road where you took one path in the past. And now you think, well, maybe actually that other path would have been appropriate for me. So that's step two, is retracing your steps. Now, if you can't find what you're looking for in the past, or if what you're looking for exists at some point in the future, then you're going to take a different strategy. And this strategy going forward is one that I think you might resonate with if you do a lot of legal research. I know when I was practicing, again, I was using my finding skills as a legal researcher to find cases, to find authority for problems where the answer was unknown, right? We didn't know the answer. And so you might put yourself in that position. Now you're almost treating your search the way that you would research a legal problem. So what do you do in that case? Well, you research. And what does that look like? I'm going to give you some suggestions for how to research. Number one is to start with the internet. Google is amazing for that. You can Google different types of jobs. You can Google different types of law. You can Google alternative careers for lawyers. If you are looking at alternative careers for lawyers, I've done a podcast episode on that. It's all about career options for lawyers. I don't have the number handy, but you'll go to the show notes. It's there. You'll find it. So research. Whatever question is on your mind, plug in some search terms, research. If you're looking at different practice areas, look for CLEs, continuing learning opportunities, where there's going to be presentations on that topic. If there's articles that have been written, papers that have been written, do your research. See if it's something that you actually like. The next suggestion is to meet people. Meet as many people as you possibly can and ask them questions and figure out what they can share with you about what they do, what they love about it, ideas that they might have, things that they might have done. That is one of the best ways that you're going to learn. And when I was doing my career transition, I had lists of people that I wanted to meet. I engaged in lots of informational interviews. I had some very inspiring conversations with people where I learned about opportunities. I learned about how they felt about their work. One lawyer in particular who left law to start a counseling practice, Bina Stock, she's amazing. She told me about how much she loved the work that she was doing. She described it as pinch me happy. And so that to me was a revelation, the idea that I could have professional work that would make me feel pinch me happy. So go out there and talk to people. And again, I've done a podcast episode on this very topic on networking for lawyers. So if you want some ideas, by all means, please do check that out. Another way to get information is to apply for as many jobs as look interesting to you, because what happens in that process, yes, you're submitting a job application, and yes, that might lead to an opportunity. But what I'm more interested in here than actually getting a job or not is how you feel when you're submitting that application, when you're writing your cover letter. Does it feel right to you? Are you actually interested? Or are you kind of thinking, oh, okay, I'll write this letter, but I don't really care if they call me back, or, ooh, I really hope they don't call me back. I've certainly had that feeling while writing a cover letter, because as you go through that process, you'll learn so much information about what you like and what you don't like. So write the applications. You might find that they call you in for an interview and you love it, right? There's something about that job that you just adore. Figure out what that is, right? Go back to your values, go back to your strengths, go back to what you're drawn to. Where is the alignment there? Why do you think you love that opportunity so much? Because that's where you want to be moving toward. So those are a number of things you can do for research. The internet, CLEs, meeting people, applying for jobs. Another option for you, and this is what I ultimately did, is retraining. And for some lawyers, you might retrain while you're doing your job. You might think, I always wanted to take a master's in, international law or some discipline, whether it's law related or not. So take some additional training, take some outside courses, and see whether or not, as you take those courses, it truly is something that you're interested in. It's very low risk if you take part-time courses while you're practicing. It gives you that taste without having to give up where you are. So try that kind of thing. And it may be that you turn out to be more like me and you decide to do a full-on career transition. And I went back, I retrained as a coach. So that might be something for you to consider, retraining in some other discipline. That will also help you because you'll know in your training, is this a good decision? Is this something that I really feel passionate about? Or is this something where, now that I'm actually in the training, I realize this is not at all what I'm interested in. Anyhow, and I realize we are really getting on in the time, so I'll try to wrap this up. Again, if you're looking for ideas, the last thing I'll say here is to then find the closest fit. So you've defined what you're looking for. You've retraced your steps. It's not in the past. You can't go there. You're going to have to go to the future. So let's do some research. Let's meet people. Let's apply. Let's retrain if we want to. Then you're just going to want to pick something. You're going to commit to something, and it's going to be the best fit for you, whatever you can find that fits best. Now, one last comment here is I also did a podcast about legacy. So we'll link to that in the show notes. And the whole point here is to think about what impact you want to create over the course of your career. So whether you're at the beginning or whether you're at the end or near the end, what is the legacy that you want to leave? Because that is a very powerful question when it comes to identifying what it is you love. So for the last time, I'll recap those 4 questions. Number 1, what matters most to you? Number 2, what are your natural strengths? Number 3, what are you drawn to? And number 4, what container allows you to combine what you value, what you're good at, and what you love? And I hope you are answering these questions for yourself as we go through the podcast. Now, why this will work, you'll figure out what you want. You will not feel quite as limited to the drop-down menu because you'll be out there, you'll be thinking outside the box, you'll be looking at what other people are doing, you'll be trying to piece together your own container. And finally, what's really impactful here is that you become the leader in your career development. You really have to be proactive here. If you are, in particular, a very junior lawyer who's gone through processes that were set up for you, like law school, like a recruitment process, and now you're the one who has to take the lead, that's going to require a different skill set. And that initiative-taking, proactive skill set is one that will serve you well, no matter what you choose to do. Now, this is not an easy process. There are a number of hurdles and skills you'll need to have. So, number 1 is time. You'll need to carve out the time to do this and make it a priority for yourself, which is hard to do when you've got competing work obligations, when you've got a family, when you've got interests, etc. So you need to find a way to push this up the priority list. You are going to need to be willing, potentially, depending on how big the transition is that you're going to make, to go through extreme discomfort. In a podcast episode that I did about transitions for lawyers, I talked about Martha Beck's change cycle model and the liminal stage of transition, that point in your transition where you're neither here nor there. It's like you're swimming across a body of water and you've left one shore and you've swam far enough that you're in the middle. You cannot see the shore you came from. You cannot see the shore you're going to. And so you have to literally rely on your own internal compass to figure out where you're going. This is where you're going to need to go. If you're making a transition that's stark, right? Something where you're really having to find something that is quite different from what you're doing, you may find yourself going through that liminal stage. I've been through that liminal stage. It is very challenging. And so you may need to go through that. So if you're going to do this, you may find that you need a willingness to do that. You'll need to commit. And there's a very wonderful connection between commitment and love. I think when you truly, truly love something, someone, you make a commitment to that person, to that thing. And, when you talk about having a job, for example, that you love, you can love that job, but that job is not always going to be easy. And that is when the commitment kicks in. It's the commitment that you feel. It's not because it's easy. The definition of love had something like a feeling of affection. You might not have a feeling of affection to sit down and do your invoices or read your emails or revise the letter for the third time. You may not feel that affection, but you may feel the commitment. And so to succeed, to find work you love, you will need to be committed to that process. You will similarly want to have a willingness to do whatever it takes to find the work that you love and to stick to the work that you love. Because no matter how much you love your work, I can almost guarantee there are going to be days that you do not love, where you do not actually feel like sitting down and doing the work. And so you'll need to have that willingness. There are times in my coaching program, for example, where I remember one night in particular where I was watching a webinar that was related to my work. For some reason, I couldn't do it at home. So I went to a cafe near my house and they closed the cafe. I was using the internet to watch the learning program, whatever it was. And they closed the cafe and I couldn't go home because I would not see the end of it. So I literally sat down with my laptop outside of the coffee shop on the sidewalk and I watched the end of this program I was watching. And as I was sitting there in the cold watching this program on my computer, I thought, this is a sign that I'm where I should be, where I need to be, because I'm doing this. I'm so committed. I'm doing this. So again, it's a willingness to do whatever it takes. And then finally, you'll need to manage your expectations. Again, going back to this idea of love, going back to this idea of passion, what exactly does that look like? What exactly is that going to be in the day-to-day? And to allow yourself and to accept that no matter how much you love the work that you do, there are going to be challenges, and that is just fine. So thank you for staying with me and for following these steps. These are really important steps. If what you're trying to do is find the work that you love, this is how I recommend going about it. And I hope this has been helpful and impactful for you. When you follow these steps, you will find the work that you love. So my friend, please join me at the webinar on June 15th if you can. And if you are interested in joining me for a group coaching program, I would love to have you. So please do feel free to reach out. You'll find the information on the page that hosts this podcast. And if you have any questions, do ask me. So thank you again. I hope that each of you, and in particular, my dear friend, find exactly the work that you love. It is there for you. And I know that when you make that commitment, when you go through the process of asking yourself these questions, that you will ultimately find it. So thank you again for joining me. I am excited to join you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.